Hey guys, tonight we slip back in time, way back, to a world of flickering candles, echoing stone corridors, and whispered prayers that never quite reach heaven. You're standing in the courtyard of a medieval convent, the air thick with incense and cold enough to bite your fingertips. A bell tolls in the distance, low and deliberate, and the sound rolls through your chest like a warning. You probably won't survive this century, to be honest, between the plagues, the fasting, and the rule of silence, but you'll witness something few people ever have, how a group of women, cut off from the world, invented a language of their own just to feel human again. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always wild seeing who's listening from where. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along a narrow, cloistered path, your sandals scuffing against worn flagstones. The nuns here, they barely speak aloud. Silence isn't a suggestion, it's divine law. Benedictine, Cistercian, or Dominican, doesn't matter. Speech is rationed like bread, reserved only for prayer or confession. You can feel it, the weight of unsaid things hanging in the air. Sisterly affection, frustration, curiosity, the tiny thoughts that make a person feel alive, all locked behind sealed lips. And yet, humans are stubborn creatures. You can only bottle words for so long before they find another way out. That's what begins here. A language not born of rebellion, but of survival. The secret tongue of the convents starts in gestures, looks, and soft noises barely above a breath. It's like watching evolution in real time, except it's language learning to live without sound. You see Sister Agnes bent over the herb garden, lifting her eyes to Sister Beatrice across the yard. Agnes brushes her sleeve twice and touches her rosary. Beatrice nods. To anyone else, it's just movement. But to them, a whole sentence. Meet me later, after Compline. This isn't gossip. It's oxygen. The funny thing is, the church didn't exactly design this silence to create creativity. It was meant to enforce humility and devotion. But you know how that goes. Tell someone they can't talk, and suddenly, talking becomes irresistible. Historians still argue whether these silent codes began as rebellion or necessity. Maybe both. Inside the refectory, the nuns eat in silence, their wooden spoons clinking like small hammers. A lector reads scripture aloud from a high pulpit, and the others keep their eyes down. But under the table, you catch the faintest motion, fingers tapping on knees, a rhythm with meaning. 3 taps, pause, 1 tap. It's an old monastic code, used for signaling simple needs, like pass the bread or more water. Eventually, it grows more elaborate, like Morse code centuries before Morse. A mainstream fact here, the rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century, heavily influenced medieval convent life, including the vow of silence. These women followed that rule almost to the letter. But while monks could sometimes break silence for business, nuns were often expected to remain silent entirely. So they found loopholes. That's your first peek at the underground communication network, tiny, holy hackers of the Middle Ages. You got to admire it. Imagine living decades without saying, "Can you believe what happened at Matins?" Or, "Sister Margaret snored through Vespers again." You'd find a workaround too. Fringe tidbit time. In some convents, the language wasn't just hand signs. It included coded sneezes. Yes, really. 1 sneeze meant, "Come here." 2 sneezes, danger. A fake cough, someone's listening. You can picture it now, the refectory echoing with delicate coughs like birds in a cage, all saying more than words ever could. At night, when the candles are blown out, the darkness hums. You lie in your cot, the stone wall pressing cold against your cheek. Around you, the sisters breathe softly. In that rhythm, you start to notice the pattern again, how one shift of fabric, one whispered breath means something. It's as though silence has its own dialect. There's humor even here. One night, Sister Odelia accidentally invents a word while trying to signal Amen. Her gesture actually means chamber pot. The next morning she tries again, hands trembling with suppressed laughter, and suddenly everyone's shoulders are shaking beneath their habits. It's silent giggling, rebellion in the gentlest form imaginable. You drift through these stone walls as centuries pass in a whisper. Different orders, different regions, France, Germany, England, all developing variations of secret convent speech. Some use gestures borrowed from liturgical signs. Others invent whole new motions, shared only within their cloisters. It's a living experiment, 1,000 micro-languages hidden beneath the Church's own tongue. The scholars of today call it Cantus Sororum, the Song of Sisters. A fitting name, since so much of it relies on rhythm and flow. The irony? These women who swore silence might have been the most linguistically inventive minds of their age, but nobody outside their walls would ever know. You start to realize it isn't just about communication, it's about control. Language equals power. The nuns can't write to men, can't speak at will, can't even choose their readings, but within this silent code, they reclaim something. Each gesture is a spark of ownership and a life designed to suppress it. When you kneel beside them in prayer, the candles flicker, and one sister passes another a small token, an embroidered cloth with a pattern of tiny knots. It looks decorative, but you've been here long enough to know better. Those knots? They're a message, a confession, a declaration, or maybe just a joke. No one outside this circle will ever know which. Historians still argue whether this secret language counts as a true linguistic system or just a code. Some claim it never went beyond gestures for food and chores. Others insist manuscripts and artifacts prove it evolved into something far richer, a hidden grammar of the soul. You wonder what it feels like, carrying so many words inside you, unsaid for years. How language becomes muscle memory. You imagine yourself in that silence, learning to speak through the flick of your wrist or the arch of your eyebrow. It's strangely beautiful and a little terrifying. Somewhere, a bell rings again. The nuns rise, robes rustling like wings. They vanish into the chapel, where their chanting fills the stone with sound at last. Latin words rise and fall and echo, but beneath that pious music, another layer hums silently. A language no one wrote down, one that lives only in glances and gestures. You realize that's how all secret things survive, not through books, but through bodies, through motion, repetition, and shared understanding. The convent becomes a kind of living library, every nun a page written in invisible ink. And as the night deepens, you can almost hear it yourself. The faint whisper of forbidden syllables, the soft percussion of fingertips on wood, the language of those who weren't allowed to speak, inventing a voice anyway. You're standing in the scriptorium now, that quiet, echoing chamber where the air smells like beeswax, ink, and secrets. Candles line the long wooden tables, their flames trembling over stacks of parchment. The scratching of quills is the only sound, tiny, frantic bursts of creativity trapped beneath discipline. Here, you start to notice something strange. Every so often, a nun hesitates mid-sentence, glances around, and writes a word that doesn't belong. Latin, French, and a sprinkle of something else. A flicker of a private code that slips between the margins of the sacred. You lean closer. Soror mea, qui dices? My sister, what are you saying? But of course, you already know. This is how it starts. the tongue of secrets, a patchwork dialect born from boredom, brilliance, and the quiet rebellion of women who weren't supposed to think for themselves. At first glance, it sounds like Latin with a fever. Words bent out of shape, syllables stitched together like mismatched fabric. But if you listen carefully, you begin to sense the rhythm beneath. It's deliberate, musical. The nuns speak it in hushed moments, hiding it behind prayers. The mainstream historical fact: many medieval convents did have a nuns' Latin or yoca monochoria, a mix of Latin and vernacular languages often used for humor or coded exchange. Historians found fragments of it in letters, recipe books, and even the margins of psalters. It wasn't blasphemy, not exactly, just a little too human for the church's taste. So you imagine it now, Sister Beatrice murmuring in her secret tongue while polishing the altar. Deus vult, maybe. She winks. That phrase means God wills it, or maybe not. And that tiny maybe is everything. Language here becomes a way to breathe. You could almost see the code forming in real time. Latin verbs twisted with French endings, German nouns softened by Irish diminutives. Like linguistic graffiti carved into the clean white walls of devotion. Each convent evolves its dialect differently, depending on where it's tucked away and who lives within it. Historians still argue whether these secret tongues were deliberate creations or simply natural evolutions of multilingual life. After all, medieval Europe was a linguistic stew. Old French, Latin, Old English, Church Slavonic, all sloshing together in the same cauldron. Some say the nuns merely adapted, others insist they intentionally built something that belonged to them and them alone. You can picture the scene. A young novice, barely 16, stumbles over her Latin prayers. Her teacher, weary and mischievous, leans in and whispers, "Just say it in sororum lingua," the sister's tongue. A wink, a shared grin, and suddenly the whole room glows with the electricity of complicity. Of course, there's danger here. If an outsider overhears, it's not just gossip, it's disobedience, maybe even heresy. The church feared anything it couldn't decode, and these women, they became masters of indecipherable expression. Here's your fringe tidbit. Some scholars claim that one of these convent codes, specifically a blend of French and Latin known as la langue de dames, inspired later women's societies to create ciphers for correspondence. In other words, your modern inside jokes and coded DMs, the spiritual great-grandchildren of cloister slang. You stroll deeper into the convent, feeling that tension between devotion and defiance, humming like a taut string. The sisters go about their chores, humming in a melody that isn't entirely Gregorian. You realize that even their songs hide secrets. The rhythm of a psalm, the pause after a word, it's all part of the code. Ave Maria could mean all is well. A change in tempo, we're being watched. And here's the joke of it all. Even the abbot who might punish them would never know, because to him, it's just Latin, holy, safe. You find yourself grinning because this is pure genius, the art of subversion through sanctity. They didn't need to shout or protest. They just needed to talk differently, and suddenly the world bent a little in their favor. As you wander through their language, you start to feel its weight. Words aren't just sounds, they're armor, friendship, confession. You realize that for these nuns, speech was never casual. Every syllable was chosen, precious, and sometimes risky. There's a moment late one night when two sisters meet in the corridor, cloaks wrapped tight against the chill. They exchange a single word, lumen. It means light, but in their tongue it also means trust, a spark in the dark. You can't help but laugh quietly when Sister Odilia sneaks a pun into her prayer. Domine dona nobis pacem. Lord, grant us peace, but she slightly changes pacem to placem, a made-up word that means pie. The other sisters bite their lips, hiding smiles. You imagine centuries of such secret humor bubbling under the surface of solemn ritual. Historians still argue whether this coded language was ever formally recorded or if it lived entirely in memory. Some point to fragments found in convent manuscripts, odd vocabulary lists that mix sacred and domestic words, angel, flower, love, laundry. Others think the real treasure never got written down because writing meant risk. Better to keep it alive through mouths and minds. As the day passes, you can sense how their language connects them. It's not just for secrecy, it's communion, a shared consciousness that doesn't need permission. When you live in silence, every word becomes holy, even the silly ones. And yet, you can't shake the idea that their invention might have started as a game. A bit of linguistic embroidery to break the monotony. A playful jab at their confessor, maybe. After all, when your whole existence is built around obedience, humor becomes the sharpest rebellion. You pause by a narrow window slit, moonlight spilling across the stone. You hear faint laughter drifting from the dormitory, a rare sound, soft and forbidden. You can't understand the words, but you feel their meaning. We're still here. We still have voices. If you close your eyes, you could almost imagine their conversations as music, half-remembered, ever-changing, designed to be felt more than heard. Their tongue is a river that never stops moving, carrying fragments of prayers, gossip, and dreams downstream into history. And though the church might never acknowledge it, something remarkable has happened. In the stillness meant to silence them, these women have created the first truly communal female language in Europe, a mother tongue that belongs to no man, no priest, no rule. You exhale. The candlelight flickers, and deep in that flicker, you catch a glimpse of yourself, someone who's also learned to hide meanings between words. Maybe that's what connects you to them across centuries. The quiet art of saying what can't be said. The dawn slips through slitted windows now, casting gold bars across the cloister floor. You're sitting beside the workroom, where the soft clatter of wooden frames and the rustle of linen fill the air. The smell of beeswax and old wool blends with something metallic, needle points glinting in morning light. Here, words aren't written or spoken, they're stitched. You tilt your head as Sister Agnes threads a needle, her fingers deft from years of quiet rebellion. She's not just sewing, she's writing. Each loop, each color, each knot. Every thread has a meaning only she and her sisters understand. You've stumbled into their textile lexicon, the needle and nonsense of the convent world. On the surface, it's all devotional work, altar cloths, vestments, tapestries, holy things for holy men. But look closer, and you see jokes, prayers, even tiny rebellions woven into the fabric. There, on the hem of a chasuble meant for the visiting bishop, a pattern of roses that actually spells out patience in their silent alphabet of stitches. And that embroidery on the Virgin's robe? A cluster of stars forming an inside joke about last week's kitchen disaster. A mainstream historical fact. Embroidery and textile production were central to convent economies in the Middle Ages. Many nuns were highly skilled artisans, producing exquisite fabrics for cathedrals and noble patrons. Their stitching wasn't just craft, it was commerce, power, disguised as piety. But you can feel it, the subtext humming under the surface. Every pattern becomes a form of encrypted communication, every motif a symbol. Historians still argue whether these designs were intentionally coded messages or merely decorative choices. Some scholars even suggest that nuns' embroidery contained hidden political or personal meanings smuggled into religious imagery under the church's nose. You chuckle quietly, imagining Sister Beatrice hiding sarcasm inside a tapestry of saints. Maybe a halo, stitched slightly crooked, like an inside joke only her sisters would notice. Or a vine pattern twisting into the shape of a forbidden word. There's one particular embroidery that catches your eye, a massive cloth meant to hang behind the altar. At first glance, it's the usual scene, Christ enthroned, angels singing, but then you notice something odd. The angels' wings form letters, not Latin, not French,
something in between. You trace it with your finger, reading the unspoken phrase, nos audimus, we hear. It's not defiance, it's testimony. The sisters reminding themselves that even if the world refuses to listen, they still hear each other. You smile, because that's exactly the kind of poetic mischief they'd get away with. It's easy to imagine them whispering over thread colors. What if we hit a word here? What if he never noticed? That quiet laughter rippling beneath the solemn chants. And oh, the humor in this room. It's subtle, but constant. A misplaced stitch here, an extra knot there, like secret punctuation marks in the fabric of obedience. Sister Odelia once accidentally embroidered donkey instead of angel in the margin of a psalter cover. The entire convent nearly imploded from silent laughter during Mass when the bishop blessed it. The fringe tidbit tonight: a few 15th century convents actually used embroidery as a mnemonic device for remembering psalms and prayers. Patterns of colors represented syllables, much like an ancient tactile form of sheet music. Linguists today think this might have doubled as a covert way for illiterate sisters to record stories, songs, and even gossip. A woven diary, right under the church's nose. You imagine yourself trying to decode one of these tapestries centuries later, the way archaeologists decode hieroglyphs. Each thread a whisper from the past. This was our secret. We lived. We laughed. But here's where the story deepens. Because beneath the jokes, there's longing. The nuns pour themselves into their embroidery because it's the one place they're allowed freedom. Needles become pens. Cloth becomes confession. When words fail, color speaks. Sister Beatrice once spent 6 months stitching a border of lilies. Everyone thought it was symbolic of purity, but to her sisters it meant something different. Remember her, a friend lost to illness, memorialized not with marble, but with thread. You realize that their code wasn't just a tool for mischief. It was a language of emotion, of love, of resistance. They couldn't speak of grief, desire, or doubt aloud, so they threaded it into patterns. It's as if the cloth itself learned to feel for them. Historians still argue whether these women truly intended to encode meaning or if modern interpreters are simply romanticizing coincidence. But standing here, watching Sister Agnes work, you can't believe it was accident. Her hands move too deliberately, her eyes too knowing. Every stitch feels like a syllable in a wordless poem. You lean closer, and she glances up, just for a moment, meeting your gaze with the smallest, slyest smile, the kind that says, "Yes, we're not as quiet as they think." Outside, bells toll for midday prayer. The sisters pause, bow their heads, and step away from their work. The sunlight catches on the golden threads, and for a moment, the entire room seems alive with language, shimmering sentences without sound. You think about how modern people leave digital footprints, texts, photos, emojis, endless chatter. But here, centuries before social media, these women built an entire emotional archive out of linen and silk. They didn't leave comments, they left patterns. You touch one of the older cloths, faded and soft. The pattern repeats, a spiral of vines around a single star. You've seen it before, in the garden, carved into a stone bench, a recurring signature. Maybe their version of a like button, passed between sisters across generations. There's peace in that realization. Even surrounded by rules, isolation, and the constant hum of prayer, they found a way to be seen, to say, "I exist," without ever breaking silence. You imagine the evening light falling over the workshop as the sisters return, humming softly. Their fingers keep moving, weaving, nodding. Every thread is a heartbeat, every pattern a whisper. You can't hear the language they've built, but you can feel it, the quiet pulse of sisterhood echoing through centuries. And as the day fades, you think about all the things that have been hidden inside beauty, truth, sorrow, laughter, and how every act of creation, no matter how small, is a kind of rebellion. Somewhere in the back, Sister Odelia sneezes twice, and everyone looks up, smiling. You remember what that means. 2 sneezes? Danger. Someone's listening. But the danger passes. They return to their work, and the silence hums again. Alive, meaningful, beautifully unbroken.
You step through a low archway, into the kitchen, warm, fragrant, alive. Gone are the stone corridors and candlelit stillness. Here, the air dances with the smell of baked bread, onions frying in oil, and something faintly sweet. You'd think holiness would smell like incense, but no, it smells like stew. You're about to discover that this bustling kitchen, with its pots and pans and unspoken rhythm, might just be the liveliest language lab of the entire convent. Sister Agnes stands over a bubbling cauldron, sleeves rolled up, her wooden spoon moving like a conductor's baton. The other sisters move in harmony around her, chopping, kneading, stirring. But it's not just teamwork, it's communication. You realize quickly that the code here is everywhere. A flick of a spoon, a shift of a bowl, a loaf cut diagonally instead of straight. These aren't random habits, they're syntax. A loaf turned sideways means more salt. A spoon placed handle down means the priest is coming. And when Sister Odelia drops a ladle, on purpose, you know it's the convent equivalent of muttering a very polite swear. Bread, bells, and blasphemy, that's your theme tonight. Because under the guise of routine, the kitchen becomes a stage for all the little acts of humanity the convent rules can't contain. Hunger, humor, frustration, even gossip, they all find their way into the rhythm of cooking. The mainstream historical fact: medieval convents were largely self-sufficient. Many had their own gardens, dairies, and bakeries. The sisters didn't just pray, they worked hard to sustain the community. And the kitchen was central to that life, often the only place where they could speak without formal punishment. Some convents even allowed minimal talk during labor. Necessary speech, they called it. Of course, necessary is a flexible term when you're creative enough. You watch Sister Beatrice signal with her knife. 3 small cuts into a loaf's crust. You've seen this before. It's not decoration. It's their shorthand for "tell me later." A simple mark of curiosity and patience. You imagine the centuries of chatter hidden in this kitchen. Imagine if those loaves could talk. The church might call it sin. You'd call it survival. One sister, new, maybe 16, struggles to carry a bucket of water. The others exchange a look, then one hums a short tune. The melody shifts subtly halfway through, and suddenly 3 women move to help her. No words spoken, yet everything said. It's teamwork disguised as silence. The fringe tidbit tonight: there are scattered records of kitchen bells in convents, small chimes with coded meanings. 1 bell for water, 2 for visitors, 3 for silence. In one Benedictine house in 14th century France, the bells were replaced by a complex rhythm tapped on wooden boards called pulsatio sororum, the sister's beat. Some historians think this tapping evolved into full-blown rhythmic language, a medieval proto-drumming code. You can almost imagine the scene: holy women conducting a percussive secret symphony between pots and prayer books. You grin, picturing Sister Odelia, always the trickster, tapping out an extra beat just to mess with everyone. You can practically hear her laugh echoing through the steam. But under the laughter, there's tension, because not everyone approves. One afternoon, the abbess appears, tall, sharp, her wimple crisp as parchment. The kitchen freezes. All spoons pause midair. The room becomes suddenly still, a held breath. The abbess's gaze sweeps the room, and for a moment you're sure she's caught them. But then she smiles faintly, dips her bread into the soup and says, "Good flavor." A blessing or a warning you can't tell. Historians still argue whether abbesses themselves participated in these codes or quietly tolerated them. Some might even have helped sustain them. After all, leadership in a convent required diplomacy. Enforcing every rule to the letter would have crushed morale. And perhaps, deep down, the abbesses understood. Silence too rigid becomes cruelty. Outside the kitchen, the chapel bells ring, the great bronze voices of the convent, marking the hour for prayer. The sisters wipe their hands, straighten their habits, and fall into line. But even as they move, the code continues. The rhythm of footsteps changes slightly. Left, right, pause. You recognize the pattern. Later. A promise for after Compline, when the night settles again. The sound of the bells follows you down the hallway, blending with the whisper of robes. Bells with a heartbeat of medieval life, controlling every action, prayer, work, sleep. Yet even the bells had layers of meaning, different tones, different tempos, some strictly liturgical, others flexible. You overhear two sisters murmuring just beneath the bell's drone. Their mouths barely move, but the tone of their humming says enough. They've turned the sacred into signal. You can't help but think. Language is like water. It seeps through every crack, reshapes whatever contains it. No matter how thick the walls, meaning finds a way out. Later that evening, you sit in the garden again, the smell of baked bread still clinging to your clothes. The sisters gather the crumbs from supper, feeding them to birds that hop fearlessly between their feet. One bird lands on the bench beside you, a sparrow, tilting its head as if listening. Sister Beatrice whispers to it in that soft, secret tongue, a few nonsense syllables strung together like pearls. The bird chirps once, flies off. She grins. "Did you see that?" her look seems to say. Even the birds understand. And somehow, you believe her. The stars appear, one by one, above the convent roofline. You can still hear faint music from the kitchen, wood tapping, bowls clinking, laughter hidden inside liturgy. You start to realize that for these women, language isn't just something to be heard. It's something to feel. The pulse of shared labor, the shimmer of hidden meaning in motion, the poetry of routine. And maybe that's why their secret endured. It wasn't written down. It was baked into bread, sung in the cadence of bells, and carried in the rhythm of footsteps through centuries of silence. You lean back against the stone wall, full of warmth, food, and wonder. Somewhere behind you, a spoon clatters on purpose again. You don't need a translation this time. You just smile, because you already know what it means. "Blessed be," you whisper under your breath, and somewhere deep in the convent's heart, a few centuries away, they whisper it back. The next morning begins with ink. The smell of it, sharp, iron-rich, mingled with the tang of parchment, fills your lungs the moment you enter the scriptorium. You think you've stepped into silence again, but this time it hums differently. The quiet here isn't absence, it's concentration made audible. The scratch of quills, the shuffle of sandals on cold floors, the soft sigh of a candle guttering, it all forms a rhythm that feels alive. You pull your robe tighter as you walk between long desks where nuns hunch over illuminated manuscripts.
Their faces are pale, lit from below by flickering light. Gold leaf glows on the page like captured fire. Every line they copy is a prayer and a temptation. Because what you're about to witness isn't just transcription, it's translation of the soul into secret art. You glance down at a page of Psalms. The words are familiar, Latin, orderly, divine, but your eyes drift to the margins, and that's where the real story begins. Tiny doodles, playful sketches, strange annotations in miniature script, a rabbit chasing a nun, a line of text ending with a word that doesn't exist. You tilt your head. It's not Latin. It's not French either. It's something in between. That's your clue. This is where the convent's secret language begins to bleed into ink. The mainstream historical fact. Many medieval manuscripts contain what scholars call marginalia, small drawings or notations in the borders of sacred texts. Some were humorous, even irreverent, created by the scribes themselves. And yes, many were the handiwork of nuns. Though male historians long dismissed them as decorative nonsense, modern researchers now believe these side notes were personal expressions, coded messages tucked beside divine text. You can't help but smile. Even in the holiest books, these women found room for laughter. Sister Beatrice, again, sits by the window. Her quill trembles slightly as if the words fight her hand. She's copying a sermon about humility, but in the margin beside it, she draws a small, smug cat wearing a halo. You stifle a laugh. To anyone else, it's whimsy, but to her sisters, that cat means something. Don't believe everything the brothers say. A tiny rebellion in fur. You start noticing more. Letters reversed or slightly warped, secret words embedded in the initials, a G that curls into the shape of a hidden O. Linguists today might call this a cipher, but it's more intimate than that. It's not about encrypting for secrecy, it's about expressing what couldn't be spoken. Historians still argue whether the so-called nuns' marginalia were deliberate subversions or unconscious flourishes. Some think the sisters were simply bored. Others insist this was their only outlet for emotion, their version of whispering behind a teacher's back. You can see both sides. Because in this room, silence becomes unbearable after a few hours. You'd have to laugh or lose your mind. The fringe tidbit tonight: in one 14th century English convent, a psalter was found with a hidden acrostic, each verse beginning letter spelling out a private plea. Domine libera nos abes. Lord, deliver us from them. Scholars debate whether them meant men, demons, or superiors. You grin, because maybe it meant all three. You step closer to watch Sister Odilia clean her quill. She hums softly under her breath, nothing recognizable, just a tune that keeps her sane. She dips her pen and writes a phrase on a scrap before burning it in the candle flame. The light flickers over her face. For the angels, she mouths, and you realize that her angels are probably not divine ones. You love that quiet defiance, the sacred disguised as silly. And there's always humor. One sister draws a mouse gnawing at the word selenium sanctum, holy silence. The irony almost makes you snort out loud. It's as if they know the whole rule book is one giant inside joke, and they're in on it. Even their illuminations, those glowing, gilded borders, carry double meanings. Flowers that symbolize virtues in the official glossaries could mean entirely different things in convent lore. A rose might mean love, yes, but depending on how it's shaded, it could also mean irony or regret. You reach for a half-finished book near the end of the table. It's open to a hymn, carefully lettered, but the capital letters spell something when read downward. Vide nos. See us. You stop breathing for a moment. It's such a simple phrase, but it carries centuries of ache. See us. Not just their piety, their personhood, their humor, their hunger for understanding. And that's the beauty of their secret language. It's never just about hiding. It's about being seen differently, by each other, if not by the world. You turn another page and find a miniature drawing tucked under the gold leaf, a nun reading while a cat paws at her rosary. I swear I can almost hear her giggle echo through time. The image is centuries old, yet it feels alive. The light in the scriptorium begins to fade. The sisters gather the drying pages, pressing them between weights to keep them flat. The air smells faintly of oil and parchment dust. You watch them tidy their workspace with reverence, like closing a portal to another world. Sister Beatrice lifts her lamp. The warm glow catches on a smear of ink across her fingers. "Ink stains never leave," she signs quickly, with a smirk. "Proof of life." And isn't that the truth? You think about your own ink, the marks you leave, digital or otherwise. Tweets, posts, texts. Each one a form of marginalia scribbled into your own sacred book of existence. Maybe we're all just nuns in a bigger, louder cloister, sneaking bits of humanity between the rules of survival. Historians still argue whether these women should be credited as proto-feminist voices or simply faithful scribes who found joy in their work. But when you look at those pages, those coded cats, secret acrostics, invisible confessions, you know where you stand. They were rebels in robes, and their language was art disguised as obedience. The last candle burns low, and Sister Odilia dips her quill one final time. She doesn't write. She simply traces a circle on the table, a symbol that, you've learned, means endless conversation. Then she blows out the light. Darkness falls, and you feel it again, that hum of unfinished stories. Words that were never meant to survive, yet somehow did. You smile into the dark, imagining their laughter echoing under centuries of dust, because ink fades, but intent doesn't. And their intent was crystal clear. If they couldn't speak their truth, they'd paint it in gold and hide it in the margins forever.
It's colder now, the kind of chill that creeps under your sleeves and clings to your skin like a secret. You follow the sound of footsteps through a narrow passageway that leads from the scriptorium to the guest hall. The walls here are thicker, the torches fewer, and every echo sounds like someone listening. This is where the outside world seeps in. Priests, confessors, bishops, scholars, men who arrive with curiosity and leave with suspicions. You've entered dangerous ground. The nuns know it too. They move carefully when outsiders visit, each glance and gesture measured. Their language, so alive in the kitchen and cloister, goes underground here. But you can feel it vibrating beneath the surface, pulsing in their stillness. You stand beside Sister Beatrice as a Dominican friar flips through one of her manuscripts. He frowns. "Curious marginalia," he mutters, tracing a doodle with his finger. "This cat, for instance." Beatrice bows her head. "For humility, Father," she says softly. You can almost hear the grin hiding in her tone. The friar nods slowly, unconvinced. He doesn't know he's looking at their private joke, a saintly feline with a knowing smirk. You hold your breath. If he asks one more question, the whole ruse could unravel. But he doesn't. He closes the book and leaves, muttering something about women needing simpler devotions. When the door shuts, the sisters exhale in perfect unison. The air fills with quiet laughter. You laugh too, though you feel the tension lingering like incense smoke. Their secret survives another day, but the danger grows. The mainstream historical fact. Male confessors and visiting clergy often oversaw convent life, sometimes with invasive authority. Many nuns had to confess weekly to priests who reported to their bishops. Some orders required detailed written accounts of their conduct, creating a paper trail of obedience. Naturally, that made secrecy both harder and more necessary. It's not paranoia, it's self-preservation. You wander outside to the guest courtyard, where fresh snow muffles the world. Two scholars from the nearby university are inspecting the convent's writings. One, gray-bearded and skeptical,
holds a scroll close to the firelight. You see this word, not Latin, not even French, nonsense. Women's chatter, the other replies. You wince. You've just witnessed the medieval version of mansplaining, 1,000 years early. The sisters, hidden behind a lattice, hear every word. You can sense their irritation, the restrained amusement trembling in their hands. Fringe tidbit time. There are records from 15th century France of male clergy confiscating manuscripts from convents due to unapproved language. One particularly scandalized bishop wrote that a group of nuns in Poitiers spoke a tongue of vanity, unintelligible even to the devil, which, if you think about it, is a pretty glowing review. That's the paradox of power here. Men feared what they couldn't translate, and the sisters made sure no man could. Later, during confession, Sister Odelia kneels before the same friar. Her lips move, but her words come out tangled, half in Latin, half in her secret tongue. He squints, frowning. "What did you say?" She hesitates, then switches seamlessly to perfect Latin. "I said, 'Forgive me, Father.'" He nods, placated. "But you know she didn't say that. She said, 'Forgive yourself, Father.'" A delicate dagger hidden in devotion. You grin despite yourself. That's the beauty of language layered with intention. It lets you tell the truth in plain sight. Historians still argue whether male superiors truly understood the depth of these convent codes. Some claim they ignored them, assuming women incapable of such invention. Others believe suspicion brewed constantly, fueling crackdowns that forced nuns to evolve their language further, turning gesture into song, embroidery into scripture. You imagine the abbess walking a fine line. She must protect her sisters, keep peace with the church, and maintain the fragile illusion of obedience. One misstep, and their secret language could be branded heresy. And heresy, in this age, burns. Yet even under scrutiny, the sisters adapt. When their gestures become too obvious, they shift to rhythm, humming phrases into prayers. When their written codes are questioned, they embed meaning into illumination. When their humor risks exposure, they move it into song. There's a new melody echoing from the chapel tonight, slow, hypnotic, strange. It begins like a hymn, but drifts into something freer, less sacred. The words are Latin, but the structure isn't. It's their invention again, a song layered with signals. Dominus voscicum means peace, yes, but when sung with that rising note at the end, it means be cautious. When the melody dips lower, it means all clear. You stand at the back watching them sing. Their faces glow in the candlelight, serene and unbreakable. Even under the church's gaze, they find ways to speak. A scholar once wrote that women's silence in the Middle Ages was their tragedy. You're beginning to see it was their weapon. Fringe detail. The church sometimes punished nuns for vain song, a vague term meaning any melody not sanctioned by ecclesiastical law. One recorded punishment from 1277 involved fasting for 3 days for singing in unholy rhythm. You imagine that rhythm now, echoing through centuries, a heartbeat of defiance disguised as harmony. You can't help but laugh softly to yourself. Unholy rhythm sounds suspiciously like jazz before jazz existed. Later that night, you follow Sister Beatrice back to the dormitory. She's still humming the same tune, low and steady. She stops by the door, leans close, and whispers, "We never stop speaking. We just change how." Her words hang in the air like smoke. As you lie in your cot, the flicker of the lamp fading, you think about all the ways language survives repression. Maybe it always does this, finds cracks, grows roots, adapts. You wonder what secret tongues exist now, coded into memes, slang, and silence online. How people still hide truth in plain sight, the same way these nuns did centuries ago. Historians still argue whether the sisters' language should be seen as rebellion or devotion. You're convinced it was both, because every act of survival is a kind of prayer, and every coded word a spark against the dark. The last sound you hear before sleep is the faint toll of the midnight bell. It rings 3 times, Pauses, then once more. You've been here long enough to understand what that means. Safe now. You smile into the dark, where 1,000 silent voices whisper back.
Morning comes soft and gray, filtered through mist that clings to the convent stone walls like a veil. The world outside has turned quiet again. No visitors, no confessors, no watchful eyes. It's in moments like this that the sisters' secret language breathes most freely. You walk with them to the garden, where winter herbs poke through thin snow. Here, words shift from sound and ink to pattern and color. You're about to see the next layer of their communication, language grown, literally, from the earth. You kneel beside Sister Odelia as she tends to a row of rosemary. Memory, she signs with a slight twist of her hand. The herb means remembrance, yes, but within the convent's code, rosemary also means truth not yet spoken. The plants themselves are a lexicon, a living page. The mainstream historical fact, medieval convent gardens were not just for sustenance. They were teaching spaces, apothecaries, and devotional landscapes. Each plant carried symbolic meaning, often tied to biblical virtues. But here, the sisters twist those meanings into private grammar. Lavender means rest, or silence kept under threat. Thyme means courage, or risk. Mint means renewal, or forgiveness. You run your fingers over the soil, realizing each bed is an encrypted poem. From above, it looks random, but from their dormitory window, the arrangement forms a message visible only to those who know the pattern. That's your first realization today. Even the ground beneath their feet speaks. The abbess, a tall woman with gray eyes sharp as flint, oversees this choreography with quiet authority. She gestures once toward a cluster of marigolds, their bright orange petals defiant against the dull landscape. You know from earlier lessons, marigolds mean sorrow disguised as laughter, a perfect emblem for the women who plant them. A bird lands on the fence, chirping sharply. The sisters pause, exchanging a look. Visitor, one signs. You glance around. A horse's distant whinny answers. Someone's approaching again. Within seconds, the garden transforms. The nuns straighten, busying themselves with real herbs, no longer secret ones. They move like a single thought-shifting direction. The coded flowers blend back into innocence. You blink, impressed. This language doesn't just live, it adapts faster than danger can find it. Fringe tidbit. In a convent in medieval Italy, excavations uncovered rows of plants arranged in spiral and cross patterns that didn't match typical religious layouts. Some archaeologists speculate it might have been an early memory garden, a physical map of unspoken words where each plant stood for a line of a psalm or a personal vow. It's the kind of theory historians still argue over. Was it art, ritual, or code? The truth might be all three. You trail behind as the abbess leads you toward the drying room, where herbs hang in bundles like muted confessions. The air smells sharp, clean, and strangely comforting. Everything speaks, she murmurs, half to herself. If you listen long enough. You realize she isn't just talking about plants. She shows you a cloth embroidered with winding vines and tiny flowers. To the untrained eye, it's just decoration. But each stitch direction, up, down, diagonal, represents a different vowel sound. The colors mark consonants. When you read it properly, the cloth tells a story. We remember when words were safe. You swallow hard. It's beautiful and sad. That's the thing about this language. It's born for need, but sustained by hope. It exists because the world doesn't listen, yet it continues because these women believe someday, someone will. You can almost hear the modern echo of that idea. Every hidden post, every protest disguised as poetry, every whisper in places where speech is dangerous. The same human instinct to speak without being heard wrongly. The abbess folds the cloth and tucks it into a chest. Someday, she says softly, they will read what we meant. You wonder if she imagines scholars centuries later decoding her stitches, or perhaps she means something more mystical, that God himself, patient beyond time, understands even the silences between her words.
There's a serenity in that thought. But serenity doesn't last here. The bell rings again, low and uneven. Not the call to prayer. This is different. Urgent. You follow the sisters inside, where the abbess meets a messenger in the corridor. He carries a scroll with a red seal. You don't need to read Latin to know it's trouble. Inspection, the abbess says quietly. The word lands like a stone. You've seen this before. Inspections mean scrutiny. New rules, new eyes, new chances to be misunderstood. Their secret could unravel overnight. You can feel the shift in the air as they prepare. The scriptorium gets tidied, marginalia scraped clean from a few pages, the garden's coded layout subtly rearranged, the embroidered cloth hidden beneath the altar cloth. But they don't erase everything. They never do, because erasing too much would mean surrendering their voices, and that they've sworn never to do. You catch Sister Beatrice muttering under her breath, "Let them look. We'll write new words in the dust." You grin, though your chest tightens. Historians still argue whether these inspections were genuine reforms or disguised intimidation. The church claimed it sought order. The nuns likely saw surveillance. Somewhere in the middle lies the truth. Systems trying to control what they can't comprehend. The evening descends heavy with tension. The sisters gather for vespers, chanting softly. Their voices rise together, fragile but unwavering. You recognize the rhythm again, the hidden language woven through the liturgy. Even on the edge of exposure, they keep their melody alive. You lean back against the cold stone, eyes closed, and imagine the language expanding around you. Not just gestures and ink and gardens, but atmosphere itself. A presence, a hum of shared defiance. You realize now this isn't just about communication. It's identity encoded in survival. You picture them hundreds of years later, their secrets buried under soil and parchment, waiting for someone to find them. Maybe you're that someone now, listening through time, decoding their faith into freedom. Outside, the wind rises, scattering dried petals across the courtyard. You think they almost sound like words. And then the bells begin again, steady this time. The inspection's tomorrow. Sister Odelia squeezes your arm and signs, "Don't fear." Then she smiles, adding a wink. Fear smells. You laugh quietly. Even in danger, their humor doesn't die. It's a strange comfort knowing laughter itself is part of their code, another rebellion dressed in gentleness. You find yourself hoping the inspectors never learn to read that language, because if they do, they'll realize the truth too late. Silence has never meant obedience here.
You wake before dawn to the sound of boots. The courtyard is full of them, men in dark robes, scrolls in hand, suspicion in their eyes. The air itself seems to tense. Even the wind stops to listen. The long-promised inspection has begun. You stand in the shadows beside the abbess, as the lead inspector, a sharp-nosed canon from the bishop's court, strides inside. He smells of horse sweat and authority. His gaze flicks over the sisters like a candle over kindling, searching for something. Disobedience, heresy, maybe even amusement. "Your convent," he says, "has produced curious writings." The abbess bows. "We write what the Lord inspires." He snorts. "The Lord does not inspire cats with halos." Somewhere behind you, Sister Beatrice's mouth twitches. You almost laugh, but the moment is too tight. The inspectors begin their slow march through the scriptorium, pulling open drawers, unrolling scrolls, holding pages up to the light. You watch the sisters keep perfect composure. Their secret language doesn't vanish, it simply changes shape. You realize now you're watching a miracle of adaptation. The women speak with their bodies, tiny shifts of weight, a flicker of fingers brushing a sleeve. Every gesture looks like habit, but each one is a word. You start to pick them out. Calm, wait, safe, danger. The mainstream historical fact: monastic inspections, called visitations, were common in the later Middle Ages.
Bishops or papal envoys examined convents for lax discipline or unorthodox practice. Many were routine, but some resulted in closure or punishment. Nuns could be reassigned, manuscripts destroyed, even silence enforced by decree. You can feel centuries of fear tightening in your chest. The inspectors reach the desks. They find the psalter with a smug cat, the acrostic prayers, the subtle distortions of Latin. The canon frowns. This looks intentional. It is ornament, to please the Lord through beauty. He hums skeptically. Beauty is dangerous when it speaks too loudly. Historians still argue whether these inspectors truly found the nuns' language suspicious or simply failed to see it. Some letters suggest bishops ignored nonsense scribbles, unwilling to believe women could invent ciphers. Others imply they knew and chose silence, perhaps out of weary admiration. You hope for the latter. Then one of the men finds the embroidery. He holds it up, squinting. What does this mean? The abbess smiles faintly. It means patience. That's not what it means. You know it. The cloth says, we remember when words were safe, but he never will. He frowns, shrugs, and tosses it back on the pile. You exhale quietly. The inspection drags on for hours. The sisters answer questions politely, their tone even, yet underneath, the code runs like an underground river. A single cough means change topic. A small bow means hide that. The rhythm of survival continues, seamless and invisible. The fringe tidbit. In one recorded visitation of a 14th-century convent in Bavaria, the inspectors complained that the women answered too swiftly and with united mind as though rehearsed. They weren't rehearsed. They were fluent. At midday, the men retire to the refectory for a meal. Bread, broth, silence. The sisters serve them, faces blank. You can almost hear thoughts bouncing off stone. Fools, brothers, be careful. Then, unexpectedly, the youngest nun, barely 16, drops a loaf of bread. It lands at the inspector's feet. She bends to pick it up, muttering an apology. You catch the words. Blessed are the crumbs. The inspector snorts, dismissing her. But you recognize it, one of their phrases. It means, we are not broken. The abbess's eyes flash with pride. You realize the inspection, meant to expose their language, has only strengthened it. Every attempt to silence them forces new invention. By evening, the men finish. The lead inspector clears his throat. We find no heresy, but too much decoration. Simplicity is a virtue. The abbess bows. We will strive for holy plainness. The moment they leave, the room exhales. Laughter bubbles up, quiet but real. Sister Beatrice leans close and whispers, Holy plainness, my foot. She dips a finger into ink and draws a small heart on the table. That's for patience. You laugh softly. It feels safe now. The abbess joins them, and for the first time you see her grin, a rare, luminous thing. Remember, she says, plainness is the perfect disguise. The night that follows hums with relief. The sisters gather in the cloister, singing again. The melody rises higher this time, unafraid. You listen, realizing the inspection wasn't an ending, it was an initiation. Their language survived official eyes. Now it belongs only to those who truly listen. You wander to the scriptorium after Vespers. The candles are low, the air thick with smoke. On the desk lies a fresh parchment. Across it, in perfectly neat script, someone has written a line you don't recognize. You lean closer. Lingua nostra manet sub rosa. Our language remains under the rose. The rose again, their symbol for secrecy, silence, shared understanding. You smile. It's their victory anthem, disguised as Latin decorum. Historians still argue whether the phrase sub rosa, under the rose, originated in convent culture or pagan ritual. What's certain is that by the late Middle Ages, it meant confidentiality. What's said beneath the rose stays hidden. You touch the edge of the page gently, feeling its texture. Thin, almost translucent, fragile, yet strong enough to outlive its writers. You realize the same might be true for their code. Delicate, ephemeral, but enduring across centuries. Later, Sister Odilia finds you still staring. She chuckles softly. You learn quickly. I'm trying, you whisper. She tilts her head. Then write something. Add to it. You hesitate. Then, slowly, you dip the quill and write one small phrase in their style, your first sentence in their secret tongue. The meaning is simple. I hear you. Odilia nods approvingly. Then you belong. Outside, snow begins to fall again, whisper soft. Each flake catches the torchlight, 1,000 tiny symbols drifting from sky to earth. You think, maybe that's what all language is. Patterns falling through silence, hoping someone will catch them before they melt. You close your eyes. The echo of the day, the fear, the laughter, the relief, blurs into the steady rhythm of prayer. The sisters' voices fade, leaving only the heartbeat of the convent. Quiet, continuous, unbreakable. And somewhere deep inside, you realize you've started thinking in their language.
You wake in the middle of the night to rain. Not a gentle drizzle, but a full, relentless storm hammering against the roof. The sound rolls through the convent like a heartbeat too loud for sleep. You pull the blanket around you, half expecting the walls themselves to whisper, because by now, everything here speaks in some way. You rise quietly and slip into the corridor. The air tastes of damp stone and candle smoke. In the distance, you hear faint laughter, soft, secretive, coming from the kitchen. You follow it, barefoot, past shadows that sway like slow dancers. There, huddled around the bread oven, a few nuns sit awake, cloaks wrapped tight. Sister Beatrice spots you and gestures you closer. Couldn't sleep? You shake your head. Good, she says. Then you can help us. On the table lies a sheet of parchment covered in strange marks. Not words exactly, but dots and curved lines. A map, maybe? No. You tilt your head. It's rhythm. Sister Odilia grins. We're writing music. And then it hits you. You're about to witness their language's next evolution, the moment sound becomes code. The mainstream historical fact, some medieval convents composed their own plain chant, simple, repetitive songs used in worship. Most followed church-approved melodies, but a few, like the nuns of St. Hildegard's order, created entirely new musical languages, scales and syllables outside official sanction. You've heard of Hildegard of Bingen, the visionary abbess who claimed her songs came straight from divine visions. Her compositions stretched the rules of melody and meter, daringly feminine in an age of masculine liturgy. Historians still argue whether her unique lingua ignota, the unknown language she created, was purely symbolic or a real linguistic system. Either way, it's spreading now, centuries later, right in front of you. The nuns hum softly, marking notes in ink. One line curves upward like a question. Another dips suddenly, playful. It's not random, it's encoded emotion. Joy, fear, memory, each tone a translation of what can't be said. Listen, Odilia whispers. You'll hear the words if you stop trying to understand them. So you close your eyes.
The melody rises, a fragile thread through the rain. The notes don't sound like prayer exactly. They sound like remembering. You catch fragments of meaning, an ascent that feels like hope, a fall that feels like longing. You don't need a dictionary. Your body knows the language already. It's hypnotic. Beatrice scribbles another line, chuckling. If they tell us to stop singing, we'll just hum louder. You grin. That's rebellion with good acoustics. She laughs, a soft, sleepy sound that almost disappears under the storm. The fringe tidbit: historians once discovered a musical fragment in a 13th century convent that used a peculiar notation, dots shaped like teardrops, each representing emotional weight instead of pitch. Scholars called it weeping script. No one's sure what it sounded like, but one researcher speculated it might have been sung only during secret vigils, music meant to be felt more than heard. That's exactly what this feels like, a language beyond hearing. The hours slip by unnoticed. The sisters experiment, humming back and forth like children trading secrets. Every now and then, one pauses to write a small symbol beside a note, a twist, a star, a curve. You realize these are markers for tone changes, yes, but also for something deeper. Their code now includes emotion as syntax. You whisper. So, the same melody could mean different things, depending on how you feel? Odelia nods. Exactly. Language isn't just words, it's how you breathe them. That one sentence hits you like thunder. It's the most profound thing you've heard all night, maybe all century. By dawn, the rain slows. The parchment before you is covered in marks, a strange hybrid of musical notation and calligraphy. It looks alive. Beatrice dips her quill one last time and signs the bottom with a flourish. For those who listen. They roll up the sheet and tuck it behind a loose stone near the oven. A new archive begins. Songs that might never be sung out loud, but will survive as whispers in the margins of history. You realize this is how their secret language evolves. It grows by necessity, bending around danger, fed by longing. When ink is forbidden, it moves to gardens. When gestures are watched, it moves to song. When song is censored, it moves into silence. And even silence hums with meaning. Historians still argue whether this adaptability made convent culture subversive or simply resilient. Maybe it was both. Maybe subversion is just resilience that's been pushed too far. Later, you follow the abbess to the chapel for matins. The sisters gather, voices tired but full. The melody they sing now is faintly familiar, the same rhythm they wrote by the oven. The inspectors would hear it and think, a hymn. You hear it and understand, we are still here. The abbess turns, eyes catching yours. Even if no one else remembers, our words remember us, she says quietly. You nod, unable to speak. Outside, the rain stops. The sun breaks through in shy threads, painting the stone floor with pale gold. The light seems to pulse with the rhythm of their song. You realize this language, this ever-shifting, living, defiant thing, isn't confined to the convent at all. It's in every hidden act of creation, every moment of coded survival, every whisper that says, not yet defeated. The fringe detail continues to haunt you, that fragment of weeping script, never fully translated. You think maybe translation was never the point. The point was endurance, to exist between understanding and mystery, to prove that meaning can thrive even when comprehension fails. As the chant fades, you breathe in the last notes. They linger like incense, clinging to the arches, the candles, your heartbeat. You whisper to yourself,
Language doesn't die, it hides. And the wind outside seems to agree, carrying a soft echo across the hills. Yes, it hides, but it always waits to be heard again. The abbess places a hand on your shoulder. "You've learned our tongue now," she says. "But remember, it isn't ours alone. It belongs to anyone who's had to speak quietly just to stay alive." You nod slowly. "Then it belongs to the world." Her lips curl in a half-smile. "Someday, when it's ready." And with that, she turns to join the others in their silent procession. Their robes brush the floor, a soft hush like pages closing at the end of a chapter. But you know the story doesn't end here. Not while there are still songs no one can quite translate. Not while the human heart keeps inventing ways to say what it's forbidden to say.
You wake to sunlight, warm, golden, almost fragile after the long storm. The air smells of rain-soaked earth and candle wax, and for a moment you don't know what century you're in. The convent feels timeless now, its walls breathing, its secrets humming just beneath the stone. You rise slowly, the echo of last night's melody still threading through your thoughts. Today is departure day. The abbess told you last night that the bishop's men will return soon, and it's safer if outsiders, yes, even you, leave before the next round of questions begins. You're not quite ready to go. You've learned to see their world differently, to listen in the spaces between silence. To you, their secret language doesn't feel secret anymore. It feels inevitable. You walk the corridor toward the cloister one last time. Everything seems sharper. The groan of old wood, the faint drip from the roof, the rhythmic rustle of robes. The sisters are already at work, copying, singing, gardening, existing quietly in ways that feel louder than speech. You pass the scriptorium and pause at the doorway. The room glows with morning light. Sister Beatrice looks up from her desk and grins. "You look like you're trying to memorize us." You shrug. "Maybe I am." She chuckles, dipping her quill. "Then remember this. Our words were never meant to vanish, only to rest until the right ears came along." You glance at the parchment in front of her. She's writing something new, not Latin this time, not even the secret tongue. It's a mixture of both, looping between legibility and mystery. The line reads, "Lingua non fugit, tantum dormtat." Language doesn't flee, it only sleeps. You smile, and you wake it. She nods. We all do. The mainstream historical fact, after the 12th century, literacy among women, especially nuns, actually increased faster than among men in some regions. Convents became centers of learning, medicine, and philosophy. Some historians even call them the first female universities. Yet, as their knowledge grew, so did the restrictions, ensuring their voices remained contained within the walls they built. Historians still argue whether the church feared their intellect or simply didn't know what to do with it. You suspect both. You move on, down the hall toward the garden. The snow is melted into thin silver puddles that reflect the sky like fragments of glass. The herbs you helped plant shimmer with dew. Rosemary, mint, lavender, each a word in the living lexicon you've learned to read. From above, the pattern is clearer now. You trace it with your eyes and realize it forms a shape you hadn't noticed before. A spiral, coiling inward, a path that leads back to itself. Odilia joins you, hands dusted with soil. She's a reminder, she says softly. Everything returns. Words, secrets, us. She plucks a sprig of rosemary and tucks it into your sleeve. So you remember. You laugh quietly, as if I could forget. Then she adds, "Tell them when you go. Tell them we weren't silent, just untranslated." It's such a simple phrase, yet it hits like truth ringing off stone. You promise you will. You spend your last hours in the chapel, watching them sing. No grand miracles, no defiance, just endurance turned sacred. The melody swells gently, wrapping you like warmth. You recognize phrases you help shape, codes woven into prayer. And somewhere between the Latin verses, a whisper surfaces, one that only you can hear now. You speak us, too.
The fringe tidbit tonight. Centuries after these women died, linguists found fragments of their coded writings embedded in manuscripts cataloged as decorative, margins filled with unfamiliar grammar, botanical metaphors, and strange rhythmic Latin that didn't match any known dialect. Some dismissed it as nonsense, others saw patterns, and a few, very few, called it what it was, an attempt to speak freely when freedom wasn't allowed. You wonder how many languages like this still sleep under the world's noise, coded in letters, lullabies, graffiti, online slang. Maybe they never died at all. When you finally step outside the convent gates, the world feels louder but emptier. The sound of distant carts, the bark of a dog, the chatter of a market, it all feels painfully straightforward after the layered meaning you've lived among. You turn back once more. The abbess stands in the doorway, hand raised. She doesn't wave. She simply presses her palm to her heart, then outward, a farewell in their sign language. Go safely. Speak wisely. You mimic it back, throat tight. As you walk down the muddy road, you start hearing it again, the rhythm beneath everything. The rustle of trees becomes syllables. The roll of thunder becomes punctuation. Even your footsteps start to form cadence. You laugh under your breath. Maybe once you learn to listen like this, you can't stop. You remember Sister Beatrice's words, "Our words were never meant to vanish." You think of Odilius, "We weren't silent, just untranslated." You carry those phrases like relics. Maybe that's the real point of language, not to be understood perfectly, but to survive imperfectly, to keep echoing. Historians still argue whether those nuns truly invented a secret language or merely repurposed what they already had. Gesture, prayer, art. You suspect invention and repurposing are the same thing. Every language starts that way. People bending sound until it fits their need. You glance back one last time. The convent looks small now, almost swallowed by the landscape, but you can still feel its pulse, humming through the fields, running along the roots of herbs, carried on the same wind that once whispered through its cloisters. And just before you crest the hill, a single bell rings from the tower. 4 notes, spaced like words. You know what they mean now. We are still here. You whisper it back.
The world softens. Your steps slow. Your breath evens out. The light fades to a golden hush, the kind that settles not just on the fields, but inside you too. You feel the rhythm you've been chasing ease into silence. Not the empty kind, but the full kind. The kind that hums quietly with memory. You think of ink-stained fingers, gold leaf shimmering under candlelight, laughter muffled by vows. You remember the scent of rosemary, the warmth of bread, the sound of a hidden hymn. All of it still moving somewhere beneath the centuries, like a pulse under the skin of history. You realize you're not leaving their story behind, you're carrying it. Every language, secret or spoken, lives only as long as someone remembers how it felt to hear it. Tonight, that's you. So you breathe in once more and let their words rest inside that breath. The codes, the songs, the laughter, the courage. They've survived this long by hiding. Now they survive by being heard. The wind outside quiets. The last bird calls. The first stars blink awake. The world settles back into itself. You close your eyes, the faint echo of their chant curling through your thoughts one last time. Lingua non fugit. Tantum dormigit. Language doesn't flee, it only sleeps. And maybe now, for the first time in 1,000 years, it dreams again.